I sat in that lawyer's office thinking I had nothing left to lose. My sister Victoria had always been Mom's favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was just Emma, the forgotten daughter who never quite measured up. But what happened at that Will reading changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my mother, and the twisted game that had been played for 30 years. When the lawyer opened that sealed envelope and read those words out loud, Victoria's scream echoed through the mahogany-paneled room, and I realized that sometimes the dead speak louder than the living ever could. Before we dive into this story of betrayal, secrets, and the most perfect revenge I've ever witnessed, make sure you're subscribed to Revenge Unleashed. Hit that like button if you love stories about justice being served cold, and drop a comment below telling us about a time someone underestimated you. Trust me, you'll want to hear every word of what happened next. My mother, Margaret Chen, built a real estate empire from nothing. She came to California in the 80s with $200 and a dream, and by the time she passed away last month, she owned commercial properties worth over $50 million. I watched her work 16-hour days, sacrifice everything for success, and somehow along the way, she convinced herself that only Victoria deserved to inherit that legacy. Maybe it was because Victoria looked more like her, or because she went to Harvard Business School like Mom always wanted, or maybe it was something deeper that I'd never understand. Whatever the reason, I'd made peace with being the disappointment. Victoria and I used to be close when we were kids. I remember braiding her hair before school and sharing secrets under blankets during thunderstorms. But something shifted when we hit high school. She became ambitious, calculating, always positioning herself as the perfect daughter while subtly making sure I looked like the screw-up. When I chose art school instead of business school, Mom's face fell, and Victoria's smile grew wider. When I married Daniel, a kind teacher instead of a wealthy entrepreneur, Mom barely attended the wedding, but Victoria was her maid of honor, whispering the whole time about how I was settling. When my marriage fell apart 3 years later, Mom didn't call to comfort me. Victoria did, but only to remind me that she'd seen it coming. The day Mom died, I was teaching a watercolor class to seniors at the community center. Victoria called me from the hospital, her voice dripping with theatrical grief, telling me I was too late, that Mom had asked for me at the end but I hadn't been there. That guilt ate at me for weeks. I'd been just 40 minutes away, living in my modest apartment in Oakland, working 3 jobs to make ends meet, while Victoria lived in a Pacific Heights mansion, running Mom's company and playing the devoted daughter until the very end. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. I almost didn't go. What was the point? I knew Victoria would get everything. Maybe Mom would leave me some trinket, a piece of jewelry or a token amount that would feel more like an insult than an inheritance. But something made me show up that Tuesday morning at the offices of Morrison and Associates. Maybe it was closure I was seeking, or maybe some small part of me still hoped that Mom had seen me, really seen me, at some point. Victoria arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in designer black, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to my humiliation. She barely looked at me, just offered a tight smile and sat across the massive conference table, checking her phone like she had more important places to be. The lawyer, Mr. Morrison, was an older gentleman with kind eyes who'd apparently worked with Mom for 20 years. He cleared his throat and began reading. The first part was exactly what I expected. The primary estate, including the company, the properties, the investment accounts, all the tangible assets worth approximately $30 million, would go to Victoria Chen. She nodded slightly, unsurprised, already calculating how she'd expand the empire. Mr. Morrison continued, reading about charitable donations, bequests to employees, details about trusts and tax structures. My mind drifted. I thought about the coffee shop where I'd be working the evening shift, about the commission I'd just earned from selling a painting at the local gallery, about the small, quiet life I'd built that was mine and mine alone. Then Mr. Morrison said something that snapped me back to attention. And now, as per Mrs. Chen's explicit instructions, I will read from a sealed letter addressed to both daughters, to be opened only in your presence, together, at this reading. He pulled out a cream-colored envelope, Mom's elegant handwriting across the front. My heart started pounding. Victoria's bored expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something, maybe concern, crossing her face. Mr. Morrison opened the envelope carefully and began to read in Mom's words, words she'd written knowing we'd hear them after she was gone. My dearest Victoria and Emma, if you're hearing this, I've left you both exactly what you deserve. Victoria, you have spent 30 years showing me who you really are, and I've given you the inheritance that reflects that truth. Emma, you've spent 30 years showing me your heart, and I've given you the inheritance that reflects mine. I felt confused. What did that mean? Victoria's face had gone pale. Mr. Morrison continued, his voice steady but his eyes showing the first hint of something like anticipation. Victoria, you believe you've inherited my empire, and legally, you have. Every property, every asset, every dollar in those accounts is yours. But what you don't know, what I never told you, is that 3 years ago, I took out loans against every single major property. The company carries $18 million in debt, secured against assets that are worth $30 million on paper but would sell for maybe $25 million in today's market if you're lucky. The cash accounts you think you're inheriting. They contain approximately $2 million, most of which will go to taxes and immediate business expenses. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. She was shaking her head, unable to speak. Mr. Morrison kept reading, his voice never wavering. You'll inherit a company that requires your constant attention, expertise you don't actually have, and financial management skills you've never developed because you thought my money would always catch you. You'll spend years drowning in debt, fighting to keep it afloat, working the same 100-hour weeks I worked to build it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn what sacrifice actually means. The room was completely silent except for Victoria's ragged breathing. I sat frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. Mom had set a trap, a brilliant, devastating trap, and Victoria had walked right into it. But Mr. Morrison wasn't finished. Emma, my darling girl who I treated so poorly, who I pushed away because I was so obsessed with building an empire that I forgot to build a relationship. I owe you more than I can ever repay. 2 years ago, I began liquidating assets quietly, selling off smaller properties, converting investments, building a fund that no one knew about. That fund, held in an offshore trust to protect it from estate complications, now contains approximately $15 million. It's yours, completely, with no strings attached. I couldn't breathe. $15 million. Victoria let out a sound that was half scream, half sob, a raw expression of shock and fury that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. This can't be legal. She can't do this. I'll contest it, I'll sue, I'll. Mr. Morrison's voice cut through her rage with professional calm. Mrs. Chen's estate plan is ironclad, Miss Chen. I helped her structure it specifically to withstand any challenge. The debt is real and documented. The offshore trust for Emma was established 2 years ago and is completely legal. Your mother was exceptionally thorough. He turned back to the letter. There's more. Victoria's face was the color of ash. I couldn't look away from her, couldn't process my own emotions because I was so transfixed by watching hers. Mr. Morrison continued, Victoria, you've spent decades manipulating situations to make Emma look bad. The investment opportunity you told me Emma had wasted when she was 23. I found the emails where you deliberately gave her wrong information so she'd fail. The time you told me Emma had said cruel things about my business. I hired an investigator and learned you'd fabricated the entire story. Every stumble, every failure, every reason I had to doubt Emma's character, I eventually traced back to you. It took me years to see it because you were so good at it, but I saw it eventually. Tears were streaming down my face. Mom had known. She'd known everything. Victoria was sobbing now, her perfectly composed mask completely shattered. Mr. Morrison's voice gentled as he read the final paragraph. Emma, I failed you as a mother. I let ambition blind me to what actually mattered. You became kind despite my coldness, creative despite my dismissal, strong despite my neglect. You are the daughter I should have celebrated every single day. This money won't fix what I broke between us, but I hope it gives you the freedom to paint, to dream, to build whatever life brings you joy. And Victoria, I hope that buried under all that ambition and manipulation, there's still the sweet girl who used to braid her sister's hair. Maybe this will help you find her again. I love you both, in the complicated way that flawed mothers love their complicated daughters. Margaret. The silence that followed felt sacred and terrible at once. Victoria stood up so abruptly her chair fell backward. She looked at me with such raw hatred that I instinctively leaned back. You knew about this. You had to have known. You manipulated her somehow, you always played the victim, her voice broke and she couldn't continue. She grabbed her purse and ran from the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway. I sat there, numb, staring at Mr. Morrison. I didn't know, I whispered. I had no idea about any of this. He nodded, his kind eyes understanding. Your mother was quite certain you wouldn't. She said you'd probably not even attend the reading, that you'd assume there was nothing for you. She wanted to surprise you. I think perhaps she wanted to give you the vindication she couldn't give you while she was alive. In the weeks that followed, Victoria tried everything. She hired lawyers, demanded investigations, threatened legal action. But Mom had been thorough, just like she was thorough about everything. The debt was real, the trust was legitimate, and there was nothing Victoria could do except accept the inheritance she'd been so eager to claim. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working 18-hour days trying to stabilize the company, that she'd had to sell her mansion, that the stress was aging her rapidly. I won't lie and say I didn't feel satisfaction. But mostly, I felt sad. Sad for the relationship we'd never have, sad for the years Mom spent building walls instead of bridges, sad for Victoria who'd built her entire identity on being the favorite and now had to face who she really was. I used some of Mom's money to open an art studio for underprivileged kids, teaching them that creativity matters, that they matter, regardless of what anyone else thinks. I used some to travel, to paint in places I'd only dreamed about. I used some to simply breathe, to live without the constant weight of financial stress crushing me. About 6 months after the will reading, Victoria called me. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, stripped of its usual confidence. "I need to talk to you," she said. We met at a coffee shop in the marina, neutral territory. She looked exhausted, older, but something in her eyes was different too. "I was horrible to you," she said without preamble. 4 years. Decades. And I don't know how to fix it or if I even can. I listened as she talked about therapy, about finally facing the demons that drove her to tear me down to lift herself up, about the slow, painful process of becoming someone she could respect. I don't know if Victoria and I will ever be close again. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, only remembered. But I've learned that revenge isn't always about what you do to someone else. Sometimes the most perfect revenge is simply living well, being happy, becoming who you were meant to be despite everything that tried to stop you. Mom's final act wasn't just about giving me money. It was about giving me validation, about saying out loud what I'd needed to hear my entire life. "I see you, you matter, you were never the problem." So to everyone watching this who's ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten, remember this: the people who truly see your worth don't need to tear others down to lift you up. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in someone else's downfall. It's in your own rise. Stand firm in who you are. The truth has a way of revealing itself eventually, and when it does, make sure you're standing on solid ground, living a life that reflects your real values, not someone else's twisted game. That's the revenge that lasts, the kind that changes you from the inside out, the kind that means something long after the drama fades and the dust settles. That's the kind of revenge worth having.